Hello, hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Cardinal Dash. I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams, joined as always by the one, the only King Jemison. Let us know what you're thinking. We're there in the chat. We'll respond to you. Please hype us up. But first, some big news out of Las Vegas over the weekend, King. Stanford women's basketball swept its 3 games with a scoring margin of plus 93 in the final against number 10 UCLA. Stanford won by 20 and dominated the boards. Kiana Williams scored 26 in that final. Now she's going home to San Antonio. She's so excited. AP poll has Stanford at number 2. Charlie Cream at ESPN Bracketology has Stanford with the first overall seed in the tournament. King, as you look at it right now, is Stanford the favorite in the tournament?
I wish, and they're the favorite in my heart, and I think that they're going to have an excellent chance at winning a national championship. I think, though, if you're looking for the favorite, it probably has to be UConn right now, led by Paige Buckers, who I would assume is going to be the National Player of the Year. UConn only has 1 loss on the season, obviously dominated the Big East, but that's not saying very much, but also picked up some key non-conference wins, got some non-conference games in, was an advantage they have on Stanford. And you've got to look at it. Stanford's riding a 29-year title drought. They have not been able to win it all in April, not been able to get to that final weekend and get the job done as often, obviously, as UConn. And UConn has been the most dominant program in the sport. So when the Huskies are in contention late in the season, you just kind of got to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I do think that Stanford is a much deeper team than UConn. And if they meet in a national championship game, if they're able to slow down Paige Buckers, and I think Kiana Williams can provide just as much scoring as Buckers on the right night, then Stanford's depth will really be the difference in that game and allow the Cardinal to snap that 29-year title drought. I think this is the best chance Stanford has had in maybe a decade.
It's looking really good for Stanford, but I think you're right to say let's temper some expectations and just look at where Stanford is at. And we were talking about it a little bit in the pre-show, but right now that Charlie Cream bracket, where it has Stanford, they're in a region with both Kentucky and Louisville. Ryan Howard is a great guard, 6'2", scoring about 21 points per game. And then Louisville's Dana Evans, who Michelle Vopel projects as a 3rd overall pick in the WNBA draft, is also a bucket, averaging 20 points per game. Both of those players are phenomenal. It won't be easy for Stanford to just get out of its region. Why do I think they will get out of their region? It's pretty simple, and it's Anna Wilson. She's been able to lock up nearly everyone all season long. Going against opposing guards, this is nothing new for her. It's Anna Wilson time. She's locked up Ari McDonald. She's locked up Aaliyah Goodman. She's the whole list you can go down of great guards in the Pac-12 who Anna Wilson is taking care of. So now you're thinking, okay, Stanford has a path to success. They have this great defense. That's what a lot of teams are built around. I was reading this really fantastic piece in The Athletic looking at the men's side. Peter Keating wrote this piece on what it takes to be an overdog versus an underdog, and that a lot of the features of teams that do really well in March Madness are teams that rebound really well and teams that play at a fast pace, because over the entire game, having more possessions means the better team is going to win out. Having more possessions because of rebounding, limiting turnovers, that is how you win games. Stanford plays at a very fast pace and most of the time is very active on the boards. They had 1 slip up against UCLA early this season, and that's why I think that game in the final in the Pac-12 tournament was so important, just for Stanford to reestablish that element of their game, that's saying, you know what, we're going to dominate on these boards. They did that, and now as we look at Stanford in the NCAA tournament, we have to start looking at them going up against the UConns, the South Carolinas, the Baylors of the world. And the reason that Stanford is so highly rated right now is that none of those teams are as dominant as they have been in recent years, where Stanford is on its own ascendancy. They've had some marvelous recruiting, they've had some great player development, and now Tara Vanderveer has a team that is potentially ready to end that 29-year title drought. But still, looking at this very difficult March Madness field, it's tough to say that they are the favorites right now.
I think it's tough to say that they're the favorites, but you were right about the expectations. And that, first of all, getting to the Final Four is a tremendous accomplishment. That's something Stanford hasn't done since 2017, and it really has not been a common occurrence for this program since they went 4 years in a row from 2009 to 2012. So getting to that final weekend would be massive because, first of all, that's the biggest stage maybe in all of women's sports, and that's where you want to continue that recruiting prowess that they've shown in recent years, get to that final weekend and show off on the national stage. And more than that, once you get to the Final Four, literally anything can happen. It's just a matter of are you going to play your best basketball on that given night? If you look at Stanford's run in recent Pac-12 championships, including on Sunday, they tend to play well in those biggest games. And the way they played against UCLA, maybe their best performance of the season, at least against a ranked team. And that bodes very, very well for the way that this team is rounding into shape in March. I mean, they led 43-20 at halftime over a projected 3 seed in Charlie Cream's bracketology. That's the kind of dominance that you need to be having as you enter this season where, as you said, anything can happen, and it's hard to be an overdog, just as hard to be an overdog as an underdog. I thought that that's a great point. Rebounding and creating extra possessions and limiting your opponent's possessions, that's ultimately the key to every basketball game, but it's particularly important in March, where I think you usually see the shooting a little bit rough. Particularly now they're all going to be in unfamiliar environments. It's going to be entirely in San Antonio, probably going to be kind of weird gym setups. I haven't seen exactly what it's going to look like. You're likely to have some poor shooting performances. So what encourages me about Stanford is that they're a really strong defensive team. They can rely on that. They like to get out in transition and get easy buckets, and they have multiple scoring options. On any given night, it could be Kiana Williams from beyond the arc. It could be Haley Jones taken to the rim. I mean, you could be using a million different things if you're this Stanford team. And I think that we're going to see that be a real advantage for them, because other teams are going to live and die by the 3. Other teams are going to live and die with their offense. Stanford is okay playing a low-scoring game, and I think that is going to happen probably more than once if they make a run in March.
And I think that point you're making over and over again about depth is the right one, where look at a team like UConn, and they have Paige Beckers, and they have a top-end talent, and they have a lot of good players around her. Olivia Nelson-Odoa is legit. But you look at Stanford, 4 players averaging double-digit scoring, but then multiple others where you say it's not a stretch on any given night to expect them to give you 10, 11, 12. Fran Belibi can do that. Lacey Hull can give you that. Ashton Prechtel can give you that. Hannah Jump can give you that. These are all great scorers, and they score in very different ways. Hannah Jump has morphed herself from just a pure 3-point shooter last year to someone who's going to the rim with a left-handed floater this year. It's been remarkable. But you see the progression of some of these players. It's just incredible what Stanford has in terms of depth, and they do have that top-end scoring as well, where you have Kiana Williams leading you in scoring in the final. You have Cameron Brink, a freshman, in the semifinal, absolutely going to work. This is just a very well-rounded team that can play fast. They can play physical if need be. That's not necessarily their game, but they've shown at different times this season that they're open to it. And then, as you were mentioning, they have that lockdown defense. They can get into a drag-out fight where it's just Anna Wilson, Lexi Hull, Kiana Williams going to work on guards, and then Cameron Brink inside, Haley Jones inside. And that's how they're going to put together this entire season. That's how they're going to put it together in the postseason, because Tara Vanderveer has a path for this team. It's very clear to me when she's talking to the media that she thinks this team has what it takes, and she knows as well as anyone what it does take. She did have those 4 straight years in the Final Four. They went back in 2017. She has the 2 national championships. She's seen this progression of basketball over the years. She loves putting the puzzle pieces together. This year, she has all the pieces. And to her, it's just about staying healthy. It's just about how can we get these players playing at their best in March. And right now, if you just saw them in the Pac-12 tournament, you're saying Stanford is absolutely playing its best basketball.
We talked about last week peaking at the right time. And when we said that, we didn't envision a 20-point win in the Pac-12 championship. That is truly peaking. And I think that that's the kind of performance that just gives you so much confidence. Because, I mean, so often you see teams have good seasons, and then in March in the conference tournament, they just seem to be sliding a little bit. And it seems like their best form was in January and February. Well, Stanford's struggles were in January and February. They popped out of that completely. And now here they are in March playing their best basketball. You've got it in the subheading 14 straight wins for this team. I mean, that's pretty impressive given that the Pac-12 is one of, if not the best conferences in all of women's basketball. Another key point you brought up with Cameron Brink, I think that she's going to be really important in the tournament because you need that inside-out scoring. And between Brink and Belibi, I think you're going to need a post presence over the course of the tournament because, again, sometimes the shooting's not going to be there, sometimes you're going to have to go inside to get those easy buckets. And I think Stanford does have that ability again and again and again. We've said it. The fact that this team has 5 to 7 players who can go get double figures on any given night is going to be the key. The question is, can they avoid having one of those games where a bunch of those key players go cold at the wrong time? Kind of like that Colorado UCLA weekend. Also, in those games, the defense and rebounding faltered. I don't think you're going to see that kind of effort again. Tara has the team peaking, has them playing incredibly hard, and has a bunch of top elite recruits who are headed for professional careers playing as part of a team, playing selflessly, and playing with tremendous chemistry. And given all the obstacles they faced this year and the struggles we've seen other Stanford teams endure, I think it's all the more credit to Tara and her program for having such a special season in 2021.
And as you were just saying, King, Stanford is absolutely streaking right now. And you, as always, lead me perfectly into what we want to talk about next. You're just too good at what we do. We're talking about Stanford men's basketball, which is not exactly peaking right now. It seems every week we're having the same conversation. Tara Vanderveer's team is on a winning streak. Jared Haas's program, not so much. Stanford men's basketball is 14-12, lost its last 4. If you look back to a season ago, they ended their season with 3 straight losses. The year before, 3 straight losses. The year before that, a loss in the NIT. They did win one in the first round. His first season ended with 4 straight losses. 5 years, 1 total win in the postseason. King, is it fair to say that Haas is on the hot seat?
I don't think so. I don't think that Jared Haas deserves to be on the hot seat this year. I do think that seat is going to be pretty darn warm going into next season, barring a magical Pac-12 tournament run. At a certain point in 6 seasons, and next year will be his 6th year, you have to reach the NCAA tournament at a place like Stanford. This is a school that does have a men's basketball history that I think is shown. Not only can it win in the Pac-12, it can win in March and go to the Final Four and be a 1 seed. But that seems like a pipe dream at this point. They've fallen so far off. And the thing that makes it extra frustrating, and sometimes coaches dig their own graves in this way, is that he's recruiting extremely well and raising expectations every single year. Actually, last year was maybe lower expectations because people didn't know just how good Ty Terry was going to be, how good Spencer Jones was going to be. So the recruiting class wasn't necessarily generating that same energy. Well, this year, when you bring in a top 5 recruit in Zaire Williams, who's a consensus future lottery pick, and when you bring in, overall a top 10 recruiting class with some depth behind him, particularly in Max Merle and Mike O'Connell, all of a sudden you're looking at a situation where Stanford was in some people's preseason top 25. Everybody thought Stanford was going to be an NCAA tournament team this year. They've fallen far short of those expectations. I would say that he deserves a major pass for this season because Stanford men's basketball, along with women's basketball, has had it as bad as any Stanford team in terms of COVID protocols, spending 59 out of 64 days on the road. That's the kind of damage to a team that you can't really undo. And if there's a graphic shown during the Oregon game of just how many players or how many games Stanford's key players have missed, and it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, Dejon Davis has barely played this season. And you've seen injuries now to Oscar da Silva at absolutely the worst time, a long absence of Zaire Williams, Bryce Wills, a bunch of these guys who you expected to contribute. So there's so much going on underneath the surface. The only thing that I think is my complaint is the fact that we are not seeing the right form in March, that again and again Stanford is fading at the wrong time. I mean, they went into the Oregon weekend last weekend, needing 2 wins to stay on the right side of the bubble. And I think if they'd gotten those 2 wins, we're having a totally different conversation. Even if they do go on to lose to USC, they're probably a win away from the NCAA tournament. Now, an injury to Oscar da Silva was a big part of those losses, but Stanford was still right there in those games, and you have to find a way to peak in those must-win situations. That's where Stanford's going to have to improve. Hopefully next year they're in a position where they're not on the bubble, don't need to win in March. But either way, at the very least, they need to be in their best form heading into the NCAA tournament. That's what I want to see from Stanford, and it would be a great start to get a couple wins this week in Vegas.
That would be a great start towards something, just because I think the most worrying part about Haas's record has been these late season stretches where they've just slumped. But I think your bigger point that it's not fair to put him on the hot seat is absolutely the correct take. There's so much good that's happening in this program that it's tough to say, hey, we need to get rid of our head coach, because really, what are the other options? But also, this program is doing some really impressive things. Oscar da Silva, first team All Pac-12 the past 2 years. That is incredible. We saw the development of Ty Terry. So clearly there's some good coaching going on in just 1 year. Kizia Paula in 2 years. So there's clearly some development of players. We saw Jaden Dallaire named most improved player just this year. That's a lot of improvement. That has to be at least partially on the coaches to say, hey, this is a player who improved so much sophomore and junior year. But then we look at the flip side of that, and it's not fair to put it all on Zaire Williams, but someone who had ridiculously high expectations, and through a combination of injuries and other off-field characteristics, was not able to live up to expectations and did not make first team All Pac-12 freshman team, which is something that we expect from a player with that caliber, to live up to those expectations immediately. That's not always fair. There's so many extenuating circumstances, as you detailed, but it's at a certain point, we need players to live up to expectations if you're the Stanford men's basketball program. And then there's just some weird stuff with Dejon Davis being benched for a coach's decision that's never really explained, both to us and the media. I know that a lot of my friends at the Stanford Daily are trying to get interviews with Dejon Davis and have not been able to do so. So just a little bit of these expectations, a little bit of these blocks that we're getting from the team to find out what's actually happening, because clearly there's some slides, clearly there's some extenuating circumstances. It will be helpful to find out what they are. But broadly, I think the bigger point is that Stanford men's basketball is doing good things and has the potential to make a Pac-12 tournament run, right? We've talked about all of the good characteristics of this team. I think a lot of it relies on Oscar da Silva, and I think that's why he was probably in that conversation for Pac-12 Player of the Year. Didn't win it, probably because Evan Mobley, you could say, is the better player, but the most valuable player right now is probably Oscar da Silva, just because of how much he means to this team. Without him, I don't know how much they'll be able to do. It sounds like he's a maybe. It sounds like a lot of the other players, Dejon Davis, Bryce Wills, they're going to be back. Whether Stanford makes a run in this tournament, they'd have to win it all at this point. I think it's safe to say that Jared Haas's job is secure either way. But it gets to a certain point, if you're Stanford, where you have to start looking at the results and saying, hey, we do have a history, as you were talking about, and we expect better than this.
I think that conversation is going to be happening this offseason, kind of regardless of what happens this week in Vegas. And listen, I just was reading an article by Jerry Palm about potential bid thieves. He put Stanford as the biggest potential bid thief in the Pac-12 because they're a team that has shown they can play with anybody. I mean, beat a projected 2 seed by 18 points to start the season, has wins over UCLA, has wins over Arizona, who probably would be a tournament team, played with Oregon this past week or a couple weeks ago, even though they were missing Oscar da Silva. So that showed a lot of resilience. I think my biggest credit to Jared Haas is, number one, the recruiting, and number two, how you've seen players develop over their time on the farm. Oscar da Silva was a number 147 ranked recruit in the 2017 class. He's now about to be a two-time first team All Pac-12 player. In All-American contention, maybe. I think if he'd gotten to play at the end of the season and put up even more numbers, he would have been strongly in that conversation. I'm sure he'll be at least honorable mention for an All-American spot. And, you know, you look at KZ Okpala, had a rough freshman year, comes back to have a really strong sophomore season, get drafted. Ty Terry comes in as around a number 100 recruit, ends up getting drafted at the start of the second round. And so you have players outperforming their expectations. Obviously, a most improved player award for Jaden Dallaire is just one more credit to the fact that people are individually improving over the course of their career. But my concern has always been that, first of all, fading in March, and also a team that doesn't always play team basketball. That seems like it's a lot of one-on-one, and that leads to looking really lost offensively, particularly when you don't have your star out there for long stretches. And so that's what's got to change. And that's what's got to change if Stanford is going to make a run this weekend. It's what's got to change if Stanford is going to live up to its talent next season. And there's going to be plenty of talent. We don't know exactly how the roster is going to shake out. But again, you're bringing in a 5-star recruit in Harrison Ingram. You've got Issa Silva as well, who's going to be a major contributor. They're going to be very, very good again next season. But it is going to be NCAA tournament or bust. I was saying that before this season. I think that the way that everything has unfolded with COVID and how much that has affected Stanford, as well as just raucous injuries that have really been happening at the worst times, I think you have to give them a pass this season. clearly his players like playing for him. They've stayed together despite these troubles, but eventually it's put up or shut up, and I think that is going to be the case next season.
And I think that last point about players caring for their coach and really wanting to play for their coach is really important. Clearly, the team has bought in, and it's not that they're playing individual basketball because they don't believe in the system. It's because sometimes that's what the system is asking them to do. And I think that's going to be something really important to address as we move forward. But earlier in the show, we talked about Kiana Williams and Stanford heading over to Texas. That's also the next stop on the schedule for Stanford football. First, of course, they have their pro day, which was just announced today. It's going to take place on March 18th. And there's also spring camp, fall camp. All of that's first. But looking ahead to that 2021 schedule, King, it's a doozy. Though, I just want to hear your thoughts on this schedule because it looks a little bit scary if you're Stanford.
Yeah, it definitely looks scary. And I mean, we talk about the odd year schedules as a good thing because the Cardinal get Oregon, get Washington, and get Cal all at home. That's definitely sets you up to potentially win the Pac-12, and it kind of was the whole reason why Stanford won the Pac-12 North in 2017. I mean, they didn't seem like the best team, certainly seemed like Washington, but they caught Washington on a Friday night in Stanford Stadium, and that's the kind of thing where upsets happen. So I like that aspect that it is an odd year, and Stanford is going to have a chance to play the Pac-12 North favorites in Stanford Stadium. But everything else about the schedule is just absolutely brutal. To play 12 Power 5 opponents, I mean, we thought it was bad a couple years ago when you had UCF in the docket. And, of course, having UCF, Northwestern, Notre Dame as your trio of non-conference games is pretty darn tough. But I would take that over this year's slate, most likely, because Kansas State in Arlington is going to be a really, really tough game. And I think Kansas State last year and for the past couple years has played really well at the start of the season. And if Skylar Thompson, their quarterback, returns from injury in time, they have a dynamic offense. And I think that, they've upset Oklahoma in September each of the last two seasons. And so they've shown that, they might not finish the season strong, but they're certainly starting off well. And that's going to be much closer to a home game for the Wildcats than Stanford. I mean, it's probably going to be a whole lot of purple in AT&T Stadium. Vanderbilt is not too tough of a game, but you're on the road and you've got a new coach for the doors. And so it might be one of those situations where, kind of like the Northwestern game a few years ago, just an ugly game on the road in what will be a pretty empty stadium. And it's sometimes hard to bring your own energy for those type of games. So the non-conference schedule is tough. When you look at the Pac-12 schedule as a whole, not too many surprises, but I do think that when you look at that early season slate, when you do go from Kansas State straight to a road game at USC, that is going to be a really difficult stretch, and Stanford would do well to be 1-1 through two games.
And I think that early slate is one of the things I'm looking for the most for Stanford. You talked about you're going to have probably, we think, Tanner McKee starting a game in AT&T Stadium in front of a massive NFL-sized crowd and just a cavernous stadium. I've only ever seen it on TV, but it just looks enormous. Having that be your first start seems crazy. That's where Stanford is going week one. As you mentioned, K-State started this year 4-1, a good team at the beginning of the year. And then you're going to USC, and then you're going to Vanderbilt. And Stanford is the only Power 5 school to play all of its first three games away from home. That's a tough way to start the year. But on the flip side of that, and what I think could help Stanford a lot, is that every single one of their home games is going to be in front of students, which I think is so exciting for the student body. And it's just, for so long, you have these games at the beginning of the quarter when the students aren't even there. This year, they don't start until everyone's on campus. There's going to be that energy from, hey, hopefully there's fans in the stadium. I think there's a possibility that that happens by the time we're in the fall. And then now you're looking at, hey, we're hosting UCLA, we're hosting Oregon, and now we can build some momentum. I've talked about that a lot on this show about how important it is to string a couple of wins together. But I think that's going to be key for Stanford this season as they try and look to do some damage in the Pac-12. Obviously, a lot of change coming over from last year to this year. But we're going to really find out about this team pretty early, pretty often, and then ending the year with big game and then hosting Notre Dame to restart that rivalry. That's a fantastic way to conclude the year. Really excited about getting those games in. Put your big game into your schedule for November 20th. Got to write that down right now. And then next weekend, Notre Dame. A tough game, not something you're looking forward to ending your year on, but once again, something that Stanford has done to itself. It's important to the fans, it's important to the team itself. And then we always find out a little bit more about Stanford from that game.
Well, your point about playing in front of students gets me hyped because that reminds me of my freshman year when I believe Stanford's first home game was against UCLA, and it was also NSO weekend. And I think that was the record for a student crowd. Like Stanford Stadium as a whole wasn't super full because Stanford had gotten off to a rough start, lost to USC and San Diego State. But the student section was absolutely packed. It was raucous. It was so much fun. Larkin, we represented on the front row. We're on the video board all day. And because the student section is rarely that hype, I kept on seeing videos of myself shirtless with, I don't know, I think I was the O in Go Stanford. I saw videos of that for like the next 3 years on like the hype videos. So that was hype for me, a little embarrassing, but I think there's going to be a lot of Frosh having a big time that opening weekend. And then you follow it up with the home game against Oregon. So yeah, there's going to be a whole lot more energy in Stanford Stadium this year. With the way everything is trending, we expect that will probably be a full stadium. And I think that if Stanford plays well in that 3-week opening road trip, there's going to be a lot of fans for those games because this is going to be probably a ranked team. The flip side of a very tough schedule is that if you succeed against that schedule, you're going to get some national notoriety. I think we talked about this, though, a couple years ago or with the 2019 schedule. If you play 12 competent opponents and 12 opponents that it's effectively a coin toss against every week, the biggest thing is wear and tear, is that this is going to be another situation where Stanford's going to be setting itself up potentially for a rash of injuries and, some lethargy over the course of the season. I think that you could argue that those offensive line injuries a couple years ago were partially attributed to the fact that Stanford was getting no time off early in the season and was not having one of those Rice games, was not having one of those UC Davis games where you can get the backups in, get the starters out early, maybe have a little bit of a relaxed game prep week. Obviously, you still need to go through the routine and can't take anybody lightly. But during the game, you certainly get a much easier performance. And I think that that's not going to happen this year. I mean, maybe that Vanderbilt game's a blowout. Maybe Oregon State is a blowout. Maybe a couple other Pac-12 games throughout. Stanford can win comfortably, but the odds are every one of these games is going to be within 2 or 3 possessions. And so you're going to be playing your starters every week. I think it'll be a lot of fun as a fan because every week's going to feel like a big game. But I think that is not necessarily how you want to set yourself up, at least for, say, playoff contention. We don't think Stanford's going to be there. But even for getting an upper tier bowl game, if you have 2 non-conference losses, that's going to be a disadvantage compared to other Pac-12 teams who may be going out and scheduling really easy in the non-conference. So I think that the gauntlet of 12 straight Power 5 games is going to take its toll. And the question is, how well is Stanford going to be able to weather that health-wise?
I think that health argument is really important and something I honestly hadn't thought of before, of how important it is to have those games that are a little bit lighter, a little bit like ramp-up games coming from fall camp, because we also talk about it in spring training with baseball, how we have all of these pitchers who threw like a third of the innings as they did most years last year because of the short season, are now having to ramp up for a full 162 game schedule. That's what it's going to be like for all of college football, where that Stanford played a very short schedule last year, just the 6 games, went 4-2, had a good year, but hey, are we really ready to go 12 games and maybe a 13th if we get into a bowl? Is that something that we can do if we're Stanford? That's a conversation that they're going to be having in their strength program and everything to see how can we ramp up to play a full year. It's just a completely different thing on your body. And then if we also look at those high school students who are coming in, the freshmen who have played hardly at all this year in parts of the country, if you're in California especially, in other parts they've maybe played a bit. But even those that are in California are now going to be having a spring football schedule where it's even more tear on your body closer to next season. So it's all of these different factors that probably aren't lining up in anyone's favor, but Stanford now is compounding that with that difficult schedule that we've been talking about. It's going to be a very, very tough year. It's going to be a year that says a lot about the trajectory of this program, and as we've been talking about on this show, about where does Stanford really see itself. Are they trying to fight for a good bowl? Are they trying to get into a top 10 conversation? Are they eventually going to be a playoff team? That is going to come through once again for, hey, you have these 12 extremely difficult games. You have a chance to prove yourself. You have a chance to show yourself on a national audience. We talked about it when we talked about the non-conference schedule, that all of these non-conference games are fantastic for showing yourself off to the nation. You're getting a game in Texas. You're getting a game in Nashville. You're getting the rivalry against Notre Dame. That's why Stanford schedules all of these. Does it play out in the end? We'll see.
It's definitely setting up Stanford for a very exciting 8-4 type season. It's not how you come up with double-digit wins, but it is how you increase program exposure and have a really exciting season despite maybe not contending for the Pac-12. So I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be an awesome slate. I just wonder if Stanford is going to have its legs underneath it by the end of the season. And of course, the end of the season is the big game Notre Dame combo. That's where you want to be playing your best football. I'm not sure that's where Stanford's going to be if they take the wear and tear we're imagining. Or on the other side, they could be completely battle tested and ready for those toughest games of the season, maybe more ready than a team like Notre Dame, who plays a notoriously soft schedule.
I think the main thing is we're both extremely excited for next year. That's all we've got for you on this episode of Cardinal Dash. Follow us at Dash Sports on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. King Jemison, I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams. Thank you so much for watching. See you next week.